Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final lecture for week 2, and that is titled Formatting Essays, MLA Formatting as an Example. So what we're going to be discussing in this lecture is some of the important characteristics that must be included with a properly MLA formatted essay. So we're going to discuss things like font, header, leader, what an academic title is, spacing, paragraphing, source citation. I know we've talked about this a lot, so we're not going to beat this one to death. And then the works cited page, we're going to talk about a couple important things there. So let's go ahead and take a look at, this is a mock essay that I wrote a while ago for another class. This is just an example. It's one that I'm going to use in this class as an example of a research essay, and this has been written in MLA format. So I'm going to talk about a couple of important things that we see here. One of the first things I want you to notice is the page margins. So you will recall from the last lecture, I had talked about boundaries as far as visual aids go. And you need to have 1-inch page margins across the board for your essay. So here, down here, and here. And then of course as well, oops, that is a terrible line. Let me erase that. As well as up here, everything you see is 1 inch. So we need to make sure that we don't go to a 1/2 inch margin or anything greater than a 1-inch margin. So another thing that I want you to notice, I'm going to try and zoom in here on this paper, is up in the corner. Let me see if I can get that. There we go. Up in the corner here, well, that doesn't look great for your purposes, but here you have is going to be your last name, and then you have your page number. And one of the things that I noticed, you probably can't tell from here because I've zoomed in and it doesn't look that great, is that the font for any MLA paper is Times New Roman. And this guy here, included, needs to be in Times New Roman. I will see some great essays come in, but sometimes, and this is what people often forget, one of the first things they do is they will put in their header and their page number. They'll write their essay, and then they'll go back through and they'll convert everything to Times New Roman, because we all have a font that we would rather look at. For many people, it's Calibri. For other people, it's Arial. I think for so long in college, I use Times New Roman because of MLA formatting, that I prefer Times New Roman no matter what. And I can look at that font and know instantly if it's in Times New Roman or not. Other people probably don't put as much thought into that, but this guy here is in Times New Roman. So sometimes people will begin to write their essay and then convert it into Times New Roman because they don't like Times New Roman, and they'll forget their font and their page number and their header, and they will send that to me in Calibri or Arial or some other kind of font, and it won't be the same format or the same font as the rest of the paper. So that's a problem, and I don't know why, but it irritates me. It irritates me a lot. So make sure, I'm taking the time to point this out to you so there's no surprises, make sure that this header and page number is in Times New Roman, size 12. So it's Times New Roman, size 12. If you're size 11, size 10, size 14, you're not following MLA format. Okay, so I want to move us over to what is called the leader. You always begin with your name. And it's going to be your first name and then your last name. And then you begin with your instructor's name. And so we begin with a title and then last name. This is important. I have seen Mr. or Mrs. I've seen Mr. first and last name or Professor first and last name. MLA format asks for just the title of the person and the last name. Something to note, if your professor has a master's degree, that's what I have, then they will be called Professor last name. So I am Professor Planets. If your instructor, I should say, has a PhD or some sort of doctorate, then they will be called Doctor last name. And you will not spell out doctor completely. It will simply be DR and then last name. So that's important. Universities tend to be very hierarchical, and people, and to some degree I get it, because I know my education was very expensive, and so it's just like, hey, I paid tens of thousands of dollars for that title, call me it. Okay, I kind of get it. And I was probably a little like that when I first graduated, because, ego, and, I'm paying a lot for this now to pay back my student loans. So why don't you go ahead and do me the small favor and call me professor, okay? I'm not so much like that now, but the people that are called doctors get really offended if you call them or label them professor. And I've seen it at the university when I was a student, where other students made that mistake, and they just get, for lack of a better term, pretty butthurt. And it strikes me as funny now, but you don't want to start off on the wrong page with the person grading your essay. So you should know by their syllabus. Are they a professor or are they a doctor? I don't think there's anybody that would be less than that at the university, because there's so many MAs and PhDs and so on to grab from a field that want to teach, that they don't have just any people with bachelors anymore teaching. Okay, next thing you're going to do is put your class title. So you don't have to put the code after it, like each class has a little code. Don't do that. So we would say 109W, or even here you could say English 109W. Okay, then we have our date. Now the date is very specific. So we'll see here, you go day, and then the month completely spelled out, and then the year. And we don't abbreviate it 23, it's 2023, okay, according to this date. So 24th of October 2023, that's when this paper was handed in to the professor for grading. So we don't go 10/24/23, we don't go 24/10/2023, it's 24 October 2023. I want to make this clear because I've seen variations from different students, and MLA only has one way in which you do that. So let's talk about our title. And I'm going to grab a highlighter. An academic title has two parts. Well, maybe I should say three, and I'll explain why. So we have our first part of the title. Let me grab another color. And then it is separated with a colon. I'm going to put that in green. And I'll grab another color here. We'll call this pink. And then you have your second part of your title. To be fair, this is an incredibly long title, okay? And it's a little ridiculous. I'm sorry about that. But when I was writing this essay, I just kind of felt that I needed to put all that information in the title, so I did. Okay, so one thing to notice is that your title is always centered. And it is always one space between the leader and the paragraph, your beginning paragraph. Okay, so we're going to say, well, I should say double space. That's what we're calling this. So the entire paper from start to finish, so from the beginning of your leader with the name right here, all the way to the end of your paper, and we'll just call that here. So that entire thing is double spaced. Okay, so let's make sure we have our spacing correct. Sometimes I see like 2 or 3 spaces between the leader and the title. I understand that's probably more appealing to look at, but that's not how we format. Okay, so the title has 2 parts. Number 1 is the main idea of what the title is. So think about going from a large view to a narrow view. So gene alteration as a mechanism to combat colony collapse disorder. I'm talking about gene alteration to help colony collapse disorder. That's actually pretty broad because gene alteration has many different things that we could talk about. So then we see our colon. Okay, so this is number 2. And the colon separates, we would say big picture. How should we say this? I'll say large focus, and I'm going to call this third part narrow focus. Okay, so we have our colon, and that separates number 1 and number 3. And number 3 needs to be a little more informative. It's going to kind of be a little more detailed about what specific area of gene alteration we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to say understanding the role of CRISPR. So that was, at the time, that was a new technique kind of pioneering the way of gene alteration. In an effort to eradicate the Varroa destructor from bee colonies. So the Varroa destructor is a mite. And so I'm saying like, well, what if we alter their genes so that they can't reproduce, right? So it's an idea. Whether or not that's feasible, that can be argued, right? So but that's what the the title is explaining. So we're going to be in the realm of gene alteration, but specifically, we're talking about CRISPR and what it could possibly do. Excuse me. So the reader of this paper would know that, okay, so in the event to try and save bees, you want to alter genes by using the mechanism CRISPR to try and eradicate the Varroa destructor, which is one of the stresses on many bee colonies today. So that is an academic title. It has to have 3 parts. A large focus that kind of broadly talks about what your paper is going to discuss, separated by a colon from the narrow focus, which gets more specific on what your paper is going to be discussing. Okay, so there's a lot going on the first page, but that's okay, because after that, a lot of the stuff you guys already know. So let's make sure that we're good with the first page. We're good with our header and page number, our leader, our margins, and our title. Another thing to note would be that along with double spacing, the paragraphs are indented, so they don't start at the left margin. They start on one tab inside. And as we flip to the other slide here, you will see that as well. So it goes throughout the paper, and it looks very, very uniform. So you will also notice that we have our in-text citations throughout the paper. And then we get to our last 2 pages, and I want to point something out here. Works cited page is on page, well, it's the very last page. So again, we have our title is centered, works cited, both words are capitalized, and then we go from alphabetical order A to Z with our sources. So whatever name you're choosing for them, whether it be an author or organization, you're going to put them A to Z in your works cited page. So it's in alphabetical order. You will make sure that the first line meets the left margin of any source, but then after that, you'll notice that any line after is indented. And so that needs to be uniform as well. And sometimes you have to play around with that. Like, for example, this guy, you have 1, 2 lines that are indented after the beginning of your source. And it can be a pain in the butt to make that happen because Word is not very friendly with this. I have struggled with it myself, but it is possible. You just have to play around with it and make it happen. Okay. Another thing, you'll notice we're on page 7 here. Okay. How many pages has the student written in this essay? Is it 7 pages? Well, let's say our 1-inch margin is down here, and we have this big gap. I don't know, if that was $1 and someone was telling me, hey, I'm going to pay you $1 and they hand me 65 cents, is that $1? No, it's not. It's just like, well, it's most of $1. Can't you just count it as $1? No, you can't, because that's not how it works, right? And that's the same way of formatting. If your essay, or I should say, if your prompt is asking you for a 7-page essay, the best way to make sure that you wrote 7 pages is to go 1 or 2 lines onto page 8. Then you know you wrote a 7-page essay. The works cited page does not count towards the page count in your essay. The works cited page is just references. Your writing is what counts. So if I tell you I need a 10-page research essay at the end of the semester, I'm not looking for 9.5 pages or 9 3/4 pages. I'm looking for a full 10 pages. Otherwise, you're not going to meet that criteria. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that up because some students think like, I got 2 sentences on page 7. I wrote 7 pages. And it's, no, you wrote 6. So we have a problem there. Okay, so let's be clear on that. All right, and I see. Well, we've already talked about the works cited page and what's important here, so we don't need to go into that any further. And that's it for this essay. So we have throughout this week's material taken a look at concepts of lead-in sentences, concepts of properly formatting quotes, paraphrases, and figures. We've talked about staying away from plagiarism, and then we've taken a step back and looked at the bigger picture of formatting an MLA formatted essay. So this should be all the information you really need to know about formatting for MLA and utilizing sources within your essays. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please send me an email and we can try to talk about it or straighten it out.